Here we go. Facebook. Just everything set up. Just waiting for the... Here we go. We're starting. Cool. And I gotta pull up the one thing on Facebook because I have the... One of my previous guests, who's also a friend of mine, has got a Kickstarter she just launched. I promised to give a quick shout out to.
Cool.
But that won't need... Okay. Oh, right. I'm gonna need to stop this and start it because I'm recording the wrong thing. Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully this is working. Welcome to tonight, the first of tonight's 2 Paranormal Encyclopedia episodes. Tonight, the first interview is going to be with Leonard Balsera, who is the author of the Dresden Files RPG and Dresden Files accelerated role-playing game. And then later tonight, we'll be talking to Stephen LeChance about his upcoming book, Confrontation with Evil. I'll give you all a little reminder about that at the end of tonight's show. I also real quick want to give a plug to my good friend Lilith Lore. You guys may remember I interviewed her back in October up for the channel. She's got a new book coming out and a Kickstarter to help fund it. So I'll put a link to that in the description below. It looks like a very exciting book. I love Lilith Lore's work. I recommend everybody check that out. And let me just check. Yeah, it should be, the screen will be black because yet again, we're having our ongoing issues with video. Serenity, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, she's listening to the stream, so I'm seeing if she can hear.
Okay, got it.
And then once I get that confirmation, we'll be good. We'll know we're good. As you may or may not know, I noticed you've done other discussions like this before. It seems like I usually have a series of internet problems.
Oh,
okay,
yeah,
good.
Of course.
We can be heard. We could be heard. So, I could do the introductions myself, but Leonard, why don't you introduce yourself for everyone?
Sure. My name is Leonard Balsera. I am currently in at least in the in role-playing game country. I am the creative director at John Wick Presents, who publishes Houses of the Blooded and 7th Sea 2nd Edition and many other fine games. And I am also the Fate line developer for Evil Hat Productions, and I have had a fairly extensive freelance career across the past 10 years, writing for a handful of other folks. So, given that there are not a lot of Leonard Balseras in the world, probably the best thing I can tell you about myself is that if you Google Leonard Balsera, for better and for worse, pretty much everything you're going to see on the first 3 pages is me.
Yeah, that helps. Looking you up in preparation for tonight, it wasn't real hard to find information about you.
Yeah, I continue to question whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing.
I wish I was my name's not quite so rare. I sort of wish I had that advantage sometimes. Just because there's a guy, there's a bunch of pages that are me, and then there's a couple more that are this guy who wrote a book on psychology and some other things. The more awkward was the guy that I used to get hits on for a while, who was a cop who was facing jail sentence for marijuana charges.
Oops.
Yeah, it's like, that's not really what I want to come up when people are looking for me.
Right.
But okay, so just for the sake of the fact there might be somebody out in my audience, and I feel sorry for them, who doesn't know, why don't you give everybody a general idea of, and certainly we can talk about some of your other work, but with the Dresden Files, you want to give everybody a basic idea of what the RPG is all about?
Sure. The Dresden Files is a series of novels written by an individual named Jim Butcher, and they revolve around the personage of Harry Dresden, who is a wizard private investigator who lives in Chicago, Illinois. And he and his friends get involved in all kinds of shenanigans, solving paranormal crimes. And the series has made it on the New York Times bestseller list a bunch. There was a spin-off television show at one point in time, and it's generally speaking, a major media property in the genre, and the Dresden Files role-playing game is your window into that universe. In the original game, you sort of create the city. You decide which city, your game takes place in, and like Harry and his friends, you create the supernatural movers and shakers of note in that city, and sort of deal with the problems and tensions in that city, and that's basically the main scope of the action of the game.
Okay. Out of curiosity, what drew you to doing the Dresden Files as a role-playing game?
Well, I can't take credit for that. Credit for that goes to Fred Hicks and Rob Donahue of Evil Hat Productions. They actually were the ones who pursued the license originally and then got me into it a little bit later on down the line. I'd been helping them with some other projects in there with their first game, Spirit of the Century, which is a sort of pulp 1930s pulp comics game, and they were really interested in it, and then they talked to me about working on it, and Fred sent me the first 5 books of the series, and he was like, read them and tell me what you think. So I did, and that was when my enthusiasm for the setting started. I could tell you that what attracted me to the series was the genre blend, because I really like hard-boiled detective stories, and merging that with modern supernatural fiction was really I just thought that blend was really appealing, because a lot of the aesthetics are compatible, right? And
very much so.
And I liked how it definitely sort of, despite all of the crazy supernatural stuff going on, was very much written for grown-ups, right?
Yeah.
And I appreciated that, because so much supernatural fiction skews younger, right? In terms of its intended audience, and so I liked the fact that there was something written for a little bit of an older crowd, so yeah,
it makes sense to me, especially, when you look at the hard-boiled noirish type of detective fiction, it doesn't lend itself well to, I think, children's stories.
Of
but
course,
it does lend itself very well to the darker fantasy horror, like you're saying. A very good friend of mine who passed away, I want to say last year, C.J. Henderson, did a lot of work with hard-boiled, with supernatural elements.
Mm-hmm.
I remember him telling me once he started out of a desire to go, he liked Lovecraft, but he didn't like the fact that every Lovecraft story, it ends horribly.
Right.
So trying to rectify that is why he brought it into the hard-boiled genre.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense. Right. It's that whole Chandler thing, right? Neither tarnished nor frayed, right?
Mm-hmm.
The idea of being able to walk in that darkness, but yet also do something about it. Yeah, for sure.
But there's also that human spirit, and I think Harry embodies it very well. It's like you keep swinging. You don't just curl up and die.
Right.
Which is one of the reasons I like the series. I actually first started with the TV series on Sci-Fi Channel.
Oh, cool.
And I went, oh wait, this is based on a book. Let's check that out. And yeah, I read the first book. I liked it. I was like, pretty good. And then I read the second book, and I pretty much went out and bought every book in the series that was out at the time, and just every time a new one's come out, I buy it. If only he'd get the new one out.
I'm very happy for the advent of Kindle, so that I now have all of them in a convenient place.
Yes, that also comes in handy. It's been fun because I have my ebook, of course, but I like the physical book in my hand. And I lost my copies because of various moves and getting them all for my fiance again because she can't stand digital copies.
Mm.
So it's like it's nice to have physical copies around again. Although yeah, there's nothing like I work overnights in a hotel, so having a digital, my reader there with a dozen books on it, so I can just flip from one title to the next when I'm bored.
Right. Well, for me, also, there's I guess, a little bit of a different use case because I require them as reference
Mm.
as much as I do as, reading for entertainment. So searchable texts are a godsend in my world, right?
Yeah, I can see that. Certainly, I have to say one of the things I like about the Dresden Files RPG, I have the physical copies in storage, I think, but I have the digital copies as well, which I got right after they came out, and then because I like, as I said, I like the physical copies, I got the physical copies as well, and
Mm.
I like your guys' digital, particularly just the little like highlighted sections that you can hover over and get more the jokes and things like that.
Oh yeah, yeah. I can't take credit for any of that either. That is all the layout wizardry. That's Fred's stuff. It
Fair
was
enough.
very good.
So what particularly have you worked? Well, let's start with what have you particularly worked on with the RPG, so I know what to specifically ask you about. I should say.
I was the system developer
Mm-hmm.
and designer. So all the rulesy bits are my fault. Um, in collaboration with a couple other folks, my friend Ryan Macklin and my friend Clark Valentine. Uh, so I would say in the first book, the first volume, probably at least 70 something percent of the text in the book is mine. So I also did a lot of the primary writing in addition to the design and uh, and a lot of and then I participated in some of the editing and revision process for all of the like character bios and stuff in
Mm-hmm.
volume 2. Um, in volume 3, the Paranet Papers, I was the lead writer on the first setting chapter, Las Vegas. I was also the system designer and one of the primary writers for all the rulesy stuff in the back. And then I did a smattering, like a handful of writing throughout sort of the rest of the sections as the need arose.
Which is the one I haven't gotten yet. I do mean to pick up the Paranet Papers.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it'll fit. It fits sort of right into your thing, right? Like that's where
Yeah,
like
just a
that's like
bit.
the people going and investigating like supernatural phenomenon. So
Yeah, I'm not the wizard. I'm the guy with the camera.
right. Well, that can be That's an important. I wouldn't sell it short.
I don't want to sell it short either, but there are days that it's like, it would be nice to be able to just throw gouts of flyer around.
Yeah, well,
Like I think we all, paranormal investigator, or not have those days where it's like, don't you just want to, you got that guy who just is going really, really slow in the fast lane. It's like, can't just a little air push him out of my way.
okay. Man, I don't know. That's a slippery slope. I personally don't believe I could be trusted with that kind of power.
Oh, I know I couldn't. I made a comment to my fiance just the other day. It's like, yeah, I'm the sort of guy that if I lived in the Star Wars universe and I had, force powers, I'd use them inappropriately very quickly.
Right? Yeah. It's like I'm a dark sider in 5 minutes or whatever. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't think I'd be a dark sider, but I think I'd be doing because it's like he's not doing anything evil, but no, the Jedi Council just get no facepalm. Please don't do that. Or the White Council, please don't do that either.
Right.
Um, Now it's like I'm wondering if any. I have a bunch of people I know who listen are friends of mine that I know are gamers, and it's like, come on, guys, we have the guy who designed the system. I would expect a couple of the people hanging around out there might have technical questions for you.
Oh yeah, yeah. You know what's funny about that? I mean, we published the game in I believe it was 2010, right? Was when it first came out.
Sounds about right.
So that was, now almost 7 years ago. So the terrible truth of it is that if someone were to come on the show and ask me a very technical question about the original Dresden Files RPG, I'm not sure that at this point I would be qualified to answer it. Like I would be like, hey, there are fan communities on the internet that play this game all the time and read that rulebook all the time now. They will probably get you an answer faster than me, because I would have to go back and look it up anyway.
I'd also say, knowing it's been a while since I've been through the rules, but from what I recall, it's not the most rules crunchy of systems, which to my mind is a good thing. So it doesn't seem like there should be a lot of really technical questions there.
It depends on who you ask, because if your baseline for crunchiness is like, I don't know, Palladium, then you're right. But if your baseline for crunchiness is like, like Rhesus by S. John Ross or something like that, or like Over the Edge or something like that, then for that person it's kind of a ponderous, can be kind of a ponderous process. But
reminds me, I actually been meaning to look up or read over S. John's Rhesus.
Oh, it's great.
He's an acquaintance. He's an acquaintance of mine through a recently passed away friend. Actually, so it's somewhat funny you bring that up. But no, I'm just looking at. It's funny you say Palladium, because I'm currently running a Rifts game on Sundays.
Right. So when you say I don't perceive the Dresden Files RPG as being that rules crunchy, given that other piece of information, I entirely believe you.
Granted, I'll put it like this, though. I'm running the Savage Worlds edition version of it, which is so much less of a headache.
Oh, is that? I haven't had a chance to check that out yet. Is it good?
Yeah, it's a much nicer. I like almost every other gamer I know of my generation, because I'm 40. I started when I was 13.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the people I knew from my generation, it's like we all bought the books for Rifts. Nobody actually tried to run the system. Because it was just too number crunchy.
I mean, we tried. I think we succeeded sometimes. But I think there's a percentage there, right? Like if you manage to run like 25% of Rifts, I think you count that a win, right? Like I think you've succeeded.
Did you work on Rifts?
No.
Oh.
I'm 36, so that was
okay. The way you said that, I wasn't sure.
When I was playing it, obviously I was much younger, but well, but it is. I mean, it is sort of an interesting. It's sort of an interesting kind of philosophy of design, though, too, if you think about it, right? Because like the idea, like I don't think anyone ever thought that like the purpose of making all of these rules was for you to use them all at all times, right?
This is true.
It was more like, take what you need to get the thing done. But if you happen to be in a situation where you need this, like if for whatever reason you're in the middle of your, time traveling a game and somebody wants to put a bridle on a dinosaur and like ride that dinosaur into, some.
Somebody will.
settlement, and somebody will, like, you know, you're covered on page 168 of, you know, X, Y, and Z book, and maybe that only ever comes up the one time, but by God, you are covered, right? So that's an interesting philosophy, a philosophy of design that I think I'm very wary of sort of saying X kind of design is bad, Y kind of design is bad. Like I don't trash on anything. I think there's a time and a place for just about every sort of design philosophy in RPGs. So
I'm inclined to agree. I mean, personally, I prefer the more middle of the road to light end of the number crunch, just because I'm in it more for the story and the characters, and there's also just the practical reality of I don't want to sprain my back carrying all the books I need to my game every week.
Right. Well, it's less of a problem now with, you know, that's the other e-texts. Like I would take a shot at Palladium / Riffs now that I probably wouldn't have taken when I was younger if I could have them all as PDFs for reference, right?
Yeah, because now you bring your reader and it's one compact book for everything.
Yep.
And it is definitely an advantage, but there's still, being the old dinosaur, as it were, I still tend to think of bringing all the books to the game session and all the dice to the game session.
Right.
And it's still thinking of, okay, there's the 30 world books, the 10... whereas with Dresden Files, you have the Your Story, Our World, and now the Paranet papers, and that's 3 books. It's, even if you're going by the digital formats, it's 3 instead of 40.
Sure.
So the information is a little easier to access, I find. And like I said, there are certainly lighter systems than Dresden. I mean, off the top of my head, the old D6 system is one of the simplest systems I've ever seen. And
still, I mean, that was what what I played most as a kid. I would probably say, like, even more so than D&D, I probably played more D6 than I played anything else. The old Star Wars RPG, especially. So yeah, I'm a huge. I mean, and that's like that design lineage is like directly. You know, when I started working on Fate, that was the first place that I pulled from, right? Like that was my background. So it was kind of an interesting, merger of inspirations right at the beginning, because Fred and Rob, well, Rob has very, very wide and varied interests. Like, Rob is the guy who somehow can simultaneously like Amber Diceless and Palladium just as much simultaneously. You know, so he's just kind of fascinating in that way. And but that was a lot where they were coming from at the time with Fate. Was, you know, they were big in Amber Diceless, and they were looking for ways to sort of adapt ideas from Amber Diceless into Stefano Sullivan's Fudge system.
Fudge, I've heard many good things about Amber Diceless, but I've never actually played it.
And sort of the chemical wedding of their ideas, and then me coming along a little bit later with this background in sort of what I would call 90s genre emulation design, right? With D6 and with you know, stuff like feng shui and stuff, and we all found common ground and over the edge, and like it was just so it was an interesting sort of blend of philosophies that sort of came together in the beginning to make Fate, and some of that is still sort of visible in its current incarnation through all of its versions, and now Fate Core and Fate Accelerated.
Well, I have to say one of the things. I mean, I'm not familiar with the Fate by itself. I'm only familiar with Dresden. But one of the things that appeals to me about Dresden and why, like I said, story is a big deal to me when I'm playing in a game or when I'm running a game.
Yeah.
So the fact that, while, yeah, there's the number crunchy elements there, so much of Dresden is tied up into story and into character and character interaction, which is definitely why I'm drawn to the system, even aside from absolutely adoring the books.
Right. Well, it helps that there's sort of a rich tapestry to base that on. It's interesting. It's interesting actually that you mentioned that, because because I've been playtesting, the Dresden Files Accelerated a few times, during the development process, and there are definitely a couple of games of it that really I didn't get as much useful playtest data out of the game as I wanted, because everybody in the group was so conversant with the setting that that's what it was for 4 hours, was people making decisions that were appropriate for them to make because they knew the setting and they knew that those were the appropriate decisions to make. But I was like, I really need to see how this goes with folks that don't know the universe very well, don't have the ground rules and the lingo and all of that. So I thought that was it's kind of interesting. It's yeah, it does revolve a lot around, and Fate in general sort of revolves a lot around bringing your characters, special fiction bits and making them do stuff in the game. But there's also that whole element with Dresden of the Dresden Files universe itself also has a lot of texture on its own, right? So I think for folks who buy deep into it, I think it has even more of that thing going on, right?
Well, it's also the advantage, I think, with Fate. There's a flexibility there because Dresden is it's, as they sometimes say, the fantasy kitchen sink. Vampires, werewolves, demons, gods, everything could show up in the same game, and the system seems to lend itself fairly well to, okay, I've got this strange thing I want to play that isn't necessarily covered verbatim in the book, but we can make this work.
Yeah. I would posit that Dresden Files Accelerated is where, in terms of flexibility, that actually becomes true. One of the obstacles that we had, and this wasn't a direct motivator for Accelerated Edition, but it was definitely something that we'd had conversations sort of behind the scenes how we wanted to deal with, is that as Harry sort of got more powerful in the books, especially in Changes when he makes the big jump. I don't want to we
don't want to spoil.
No spoil. Yeah, spoiler free zone. But one of the problems that we did run into going into Paranet Papers and wondering about what we were going to do after that was that there's sort of an absolute power structure, right, baked into the rules of the Dresden Files RPG, and that certain powers cost certain amounts of refresh, and having a certain amount of refresh in powers sort of puts you in a particular weight class compared to other characters. And it has a lot of similarities in that way to a lot of point buy RPGs, right? there's a difference in GURPS between a 100 point and a 200 point and a 300 point character, right?
Yeah.
And the frame of reference, sort of the 0 point of that power structure, was Harry Dresden at the beginning of Stormfront, which meant that you get a dozen books down the road, and you start seeing like the edges of that structure, right?
Yeah.
And Jim wrote us an email where he basically was like, Cold Days is gonna break your RPG, sorry.
Yeah.
And we were like, oh, Jim, that jokester. And then I read Cold Days and I called Fred on the phone and I said, we got to talk about this. Because, basically Harry like moves into a world where like everything that he deals with, and then arguably maybe even Harry himself, is what our original game would define as a plot device, right?
Yeah.
Like, we can't really stat this thing because it sort of buries the needle on our scale. So here are some abstractions you can use, and that's it. So that was definitely a design concern of mine going into Accelerated, was how do I not have the Cold Days problem, right? What I called in my head the Cold Days problem. So I think that is true, more true of Accelerated than it is of the original game. That flexibility.
Well, I do see what you mean. Certainly, knowing the ramp up in power you're talking about.
Yeah.
And you definitely remind me of the old adage I've seen in a lot of other games of, if you stat it, they will kill it.
Right. Right. Well, not just that, but like
Also, you can't just like the perfect example from the Our World book. It's like, how on earth do you stat the devil?
Right. Yeah. Or any of them, right? Yeah. Like, Mab, yeah, and so on, and so so that's one of the things that's kind of one of the things that's in Dresden Files Accelerated. In fact, in the like little overview chapter of major characters, is that Mab's stat block is in there. So like we figured that out, right?
Wow.
So I was pretty happy about that.
I'm impressed.
Well, it's a little bit of sleight of hand. I'm not gonna lie, because it's basically it relies on the introduction of scale as a relative dimension of measure instead of an absolute one.
Mm-hmm.
So all characters are essentially made the same, but they are put on a tier of scale that gives them an advantage over the other ones. So the way that you make Mab as a character is not different from how you make any other character in the game, except you add, once you're done with all of that she happens to be godlike, or whatever.
Yeah.
That I'm hoping will allow for some longevity in the design, where folks can sort of take that and apply it forward and have like the game where you're all Paranet folks at street level wandering around, and you're and the villain of the week is one werewolf that's terrorizing people in your neighborhood, right? Or the game where like everybody is one of the forgotten deities of planet Earth, and it's all like never politics and like all weirdness. And that, largely speaking, those two modes of play, mechanically speaking, I should say, will not differ too much from one another, right? And then where you really see the difference is when
one interacts with the other.
Yeah.
Because when Odin and Zeus decide to smack down, they're relatively on the same power scale.
Right.
Whereas Odin and this guy who can move things with his mind on a good day, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Which actually, what I was referring to more with the flexibility wasn't so much the power scales, because I'm not necessarily, when I'm looking to run a game, I'm running Rift, so there are certainly days where it's like, okay, let's go Gonzo. You want to play a dragon? You can play a dragon. And while you're at it, ooh, sorry, knocked some stuff over here. And you can play the cyborg, and you can play this, and it's all good.
I imagine that was a sound effect. You want to play dragon? You can play dragon. Things crash. Ah.
Actually, that was a bottle of mead falling over, believe it or not.
Oh, God. Oh, is it all right?
Didn't break.
Good. Oh, man, that would be tragic.
Yes, it would. But, no, it's more the idea of just the things that are not overpowered, but interesting.
Yeah.
Creating, changelings of your own unique Fey type, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of, it works very well for that. Or the idea I had at one point, of doing, but I very rarely get to play RPGs. I'm mostly the guy running the game.
Yeah, I feel you.
But well, I also happen to like running, to some extent prefer running games, so it's not all bad at least.
Mm-hmm.
But looking at the system, and looking at Dresden Files, because Jim, at least from my experience in 20 years investigating and quite a few more researching folklore and mythology, he draws a lot on mythology.
Yeah.
In places, and I'm just looking. It's like, what about doing a child of one of the Black Court, the Dompier concept? And it's like you might be able to pull that off with the rules.
Yeah, for sure.
You're not necessarily going to have somebody sit down and play a full-blown Black Court vampire. And for the people listening who don't know Dresden Files, and again, I'm sorry that you're not aware of it yet, go buy the books and the RPG. But Black Court vampires are Dracula.
Right.
Literally, it's like no. The book Dracula is written about in universe about the Black Court, which is one of the many things I love about the series, because I'm a huge Dracula fan.
Oh yeah. Well, and and they have that whole cool in setting that Bram Stoker.
He wrote the book specifically to tell people how to kill the Black Court.
You should check out, as a complete aside.
Please, by all means.
If you haven't checked out my friend Kenneth Height's game, Knights Black Agents from Pelgrane Press.
I just read about that the other day. I was actually planning on picking it up.
Oh man, and they have that companion
Dracula dossier, yes.
That Dracula dossiers and Dracula Unredacted. Oh man, it's good. Oh.
I was planning on getting it anyway, and now I've got a recommendation for it. Awesome.
Yeah, for sure, it's good.
It's like the idea just sounds like so much fun, and it's like
it's the kind of writing. One day I aspire to be that good. That's how good it is. It's one of those things where, having seen it, I was like, it would be nice if I could stand up on that level and produce work on that level, and I hope to one day. It's very good. It is inspiring to me.
I will say as well, for the record, this one of the advantages of the situation. It's my show. I don't have to answer to producers or anything like that. So feel free to plug anything you want. Your books, anyone else's books. The reason I originally invited you on is the Dresden Files, but it's not a hard fast. This is the only thing we're allowed to talk about.
Right. Well, if I started, we should. I appreciate that, but I don't think you should give me that much rope upon which to hang myself, because we only have 2 hours, so. I'm a fan of a lot of things, so.
So am I, which is why I have a YouTube channel.
Right. Yeah.
Because there's been a couple of times when it's like, well, this is supposed to be about the paranormal. Does this topic really fit? It's like, I don't care. It's my channel.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
So there's occasion, there's. You write RPGs. My guest last week wrote RPGs. It's like they're paranormal RPGs, but you're not out there chasing ghosts. It's like,
Right.
it's my channel. I like RPGs. It's a paranormal RPG. That's close enough for my book. And my listener, looking at the numbers, my listener seems to have enjoyed it, so I don't think anybody's complaining.
Right. Awesome.
It's also the other truth that I know, and I would think it helps sales in terms of the RPG. It's like a lot of the geeks I know are into the paranormal.
Sure.
So any RPG, like the Dresden Files, where it's like, now you've got the vampires and the ghosts and the things of that nature, it's not going to hurt sales.
Right, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Well, and that's the the trick, right? Is that it's actually we're sitting here talking about elements of system design and sort of like what makes the system work and so on and so forth. But the reality of the matter is the game is as widely accepted as it is because the Dresden Files are popular, right? Yeah. And like that's what people the elevator pitch for the Dresden Files RPG does not include any of the stuff we just talked about, right? Like
no.
It's be supernatural creatures investigating supernatural crimes in city, urban fantasy, awesomeness, go do what you got to do, right? And then the fact that the system, hopefully, arguably speaking, holds up the potential of that promise is sort of like the bonus that you discover on the other end, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. I know my place in the grand scheme of things, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
You're taking part in publishing a good RPG. I think that's what matters.
Yeah.
I'll personally say flat out, I enjoy the system. I enjoy the writing. I think it's a good piece of work. I do recommend people interested in RPGs give it a look. And granted, you're in a better position because of the popularity of the books, but it's something that could stand. I mean, in a world without the Dresden Files, I think it's something that could stand fairly well on its own.
Well,
you just have to pitch it in a different way. You read the books.
I am glad we will never get the chance to test that theory.
Yeah. Especially, it's not. I would not want to test that theory in your position either. Just by virtue of. Yeah, I understand the difficulties of raising popularity and things of that nature. I mean, I've been at this a year. I've got 163 subscribers.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So, well, and that's part of the challenge, right? Because that's part of the challenge you were talking about just now, right? With the boundaries of like, all right, this is a show about the paranormal, yada yada yada. What topics fit into that, right? Like, there's always that danger if you go too far out of whatever that bubble is, that your listenership is going to be like, this is not what I signed up for, right? So yeah.
It is. It helps to know. I mean, like, I've done radio 10 years, all about the paranormal. I was actually part of one of the first internet radio shows.
Oh, cool.
This is back late 90s when... And it was fun because we're in our basement, in the, a closet in this guy's basement. That there's barely room for the two of us. There's so much gizmos in the blasted thing.
Right, and like back then, all of the gizmos were enormous too, right? Like, so, yeah.
Basically, if you brought a cell phone near his basement, it just started to weep. There was the one night we were heading to Penn State for a lecture, and I was trying to reach a friend of mine who lived out there, and it was working okay in his basement, and then I just walked across the threshold and...
Right. That's one of those, like, it was a fun sort of nostalgic trip to watch that show Stranger Things on Netflix.
Oh, yes.
Because, like, they have that building that's the research facility, and the computers are like whole rooms, computers. and stuff. The art direction, they were really spot on. And like the suitcase cell phones and stuff.
Oh yeah.
Like that was cool to
No, my
see all that.
fiance and I just started getting into that. I've got a million things I'm always watching, so I'm behind on everything.
Oh yeah,
I'm sure you know what I mean. But we
for
just
sure.
started watching it and enjoying it enormously. She's much younger than me, being in her 20s, but I'm 40, and it's like I grew up in the 80s. I remember this era.
Right, for sure. And that's it is. I think you'll dig it. I think you'll dig it. It's
Oh, I'm a bunch of episodes in. I absolutely love it.
yeah. But it was really surprising because that's what happens, right? But you know that, like, if you're old enough, like there are moments, a lot of times when you see stuff that's like set period, and it's the same thing, like, when I watch movies with my dad that are set in the 60s, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing. He'll point to stuff and be like, well, that didn't really look like that, or we didn't really have those or whatever. But Stranger Things is nigh flawless in its presentation of the 1980s, and it's just really, like, the attention to detail. A bunch of times during the show, I found myself just pausing the screen to look at the stuff in the background and go, are they tricking me, or does all of this stuff really fit? And I'm like, man, they were so good. It was so good.
Yeah. Well, I also just remember watching the first episode and just watching them sit down and the expert D&D book, and like, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. The D&D, yeah. Oh man, that's so cool.
It's like, yeah.
Right.
We're kids, we're bored. Let's go try and kill the demon lords of the abyss because it's fun.
Right. Yep.
And in general, it's off topic, but again, it's my show. We're having fun. Who cares? It's the thing I also find very neat with the show is just how many of the classic horror tropes it avoids. It's like,
right. Yeah, for sure.
We're getting on, I think, the 7th episode or so, and it's like, wait, the cops aren't completely useless. The adults aren't completely useless.
Right. Well, it is that there is that whole. And again, I don't want to. No spoilers, right? But like, how the characters. It's sort of like they do a lot of stuff in that show where the characters confront the cliche and then overcome it.
Yeah.
Like when you watch The Cop, you're pretty sure you know what the cop's gonna be, like what character archetype that is, and then, a few episodes in, when he starts taking that stuff seriously and is like, hold on, right? Or like, you worry that the families of innocent bystanders are going to sort of like remain clueless and ineffectual, and then they very much don't. And that's
it's like, wait, people are actually behaving rationally.
Right. Or understandably irrationally, right?
Yeah. Yes.
But yeah, so it's very cool. Yeah, it's a good show.
As my fiance just commented in chat, no one is a complete idiot in Stranger Things.
Right. Yeah.
No. Oh man, it just made me think of something and I forgot. But no, I like that. I like the no, we're not, because especially it's such an 80s era piece. Like you said, there's so much that it's so recognizable, and to see it gracefully avoid so many of the stereotypes.
Yeah.
And that were especially prevalent in the 80s. I mean, good heavens, the as much as I enjoy it, the It miniseries.
Oh
the way
yeah.
It embraced those stereotypes.
Right. Yeah.
But no, the comparison I had just thought of, like I said, my friend CJ, he wrote a book, called Central Park Night, which is urban fantasy where dragons come back to the world, and full size dragons flying around.
Yeah.
And there's a discussion at one point between the main characters and the U.S. government about what cover story are we going to give this? How are we going to convince people this didn't happen? And the one character just looks at them and goes, "You can't!
Right. Yeah.
Are you idiots? Dragons are flying around.
Right.
Cities are being destroyed. You can't tell people a cover story to hide it."
Right. Yeah. For sure.
And it works better in Dresden Files because yes, there are dragons and crazier things out there in the world, but they're not blowing up New York City.
Right. Yeah, that zone there's that zone of separation, or there's like, it's the idea that like the mortal world is part of a larger ecosystem that includes all of these things, right?
Yeah.
I remember I had a conversation with Jim, where I was asking him for advice about talking about the Winter Court, and he so for your listeners who don't know, the Unseelie Court or the Winter Court of Fae in the Dresden Files has sort of a very specific role that you find out about later in the books, in their own realm, right? Like in the realm of fairy, there's a reason why the Winter Court are there. And so one of the things that he told me was that a lot of times when you encounter Winter Court Fae on Earth, and the reason why they get up into so much shenanigans is because it's like rowdy soldiers on shore leave.
That makes an enormous amount of sense.
Right? And so it's not like the Unseelie are necessarily like diabolical or evil or anything like that. It's that like it's their, like, them going into the mortal realm and like, throwing their powers around and like doing stuff with people is them blowing off steam because they have this other very important job.
And WoW isn't important for the people who haven't gotten there yet.
Right. And I thought that was a really interesting. What was really interesting about that world building is moments like that, right? When I mean, obviously I have the advantage of being able to talk to Jim from time to time, but like,
can I just say how extremely jealous I am on that count?
Sure.
Since I started this show, there have been 2 interviews I've wanted to get. One I got, he's the other one I'm still trying to nail down.
Right. He is tremendously busy.
Yeah, I realize that, and I don't. There's no anger about that. It's just jealous.
He's hard for me to nail down, so I can imagine like anyone else, right?
Yeah.
But I think it comes through in the books too. That there is a sense of and it's one of the things I really like about the setting, that there's not a separation necessarily between the mortal world and the supernatural world, right? Like they are the mortal world is part of a socio-political continuum that includes the supernatural world, even if they are not aware of how that continuum works. Like there is a relationship between the mortal world and the supernatural world rather than a barrier, right?
Yeah.
And I find that really interesting, right?
It is. I like that. I like as well just addressing head on. Well, why do the supernaturals keep this hidden from the mortals? And it's like, well, the obvious answer that's addressed in the books is a couple of points. Is I really don't think anyone in Fairy wants to know what happens when you nuke Mab.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
I don't want to get. I can't. The other interview I wanted to get, which was a urban fantasy writer by the name of Patrick Thomas, did a book actually based on the United States government nukes Fairy.
Right.
It ends horribly.
Well, of course.
It's like, yeah, that's not a good idea. And the fact that where in the past, with World of Darkness and other games, it was like, well, the humans have the numbers, It's like, well, we have the numbers, and now we have enough technology to make them go, wait a minute.
Right.
Yeah, magic is nice, but nuke.
Right.
But so talk a little bit about Accelerated, since that's the one that's coming out.
Sure. The Dresden Files Accelerated Edition. Actually, we don't even. It's now just called Dresden Files Accelerated. Mm-hmm. It was originally Dresden Files the Accelerated Edition, right? As originally advertised on the thing. It was the final stretch goal in the Fate Core Kickstarter. It is, I believe, if I remember correctly, what pushed the Fate Core Kickstarter over $500,000. And the idea behind it, at least in terms of what was on my mind originally going into it, was to make a game that caught a bunch of cross sections of audience that the original game didn't catch. The first of those being folks who were newer to the hobby, who were fans of the Dresden Files, and might be interested in the role-playing game, but then saw that the role-playing game consisted of these two giant bullet-stopping tomes, hardcover tomes, yeah. And were like, man, I don't know. Because, and that's what I was talking about that earlier when you were talking about perspective, rules crunchiness, and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. That's why I was saying, when you're coming at it from the perspective of, I am comfortable playing Palladium or playing Rifts or whatever, the Dresden Files games seem light on the ground. But if you've never played a role-playing game before, that is intimidating, right? That's massive.
It's huge books, and it's not a cheap outlay of money.
Right, and you don't really know, and even reading through them, you don't. It can be difficult to sort of parse how to get into it. So, taking a philosophical cue from Fate Accelerated, which was one of the two versions of Fate that we put out with the Fate Core Kickstarter, we decided to take a stab at making the Dresden Files game that could grab those folks. And so instead of it being these two gigantic hardcover bullet-stopping tomes, here's a smaller book with a design philosophy that's sort of geared to getting you into your character and onto the table playing in a much shorter amount of time with a concrete idea of what you're there to do and and that kind of thing. So that was audience A, right? Mm-hmm. Audience B, that it was designed to go after were folks that didn't have quite the time, you were talking about. You like to run one shots, right? So or are stuck in the position, however you want to put it, of running one shots. And so we wanted something that could provide a satisfying play experience in a shorter number of sessions that wouldn't require all of this effort to make something that you're going to play across a year-long campaign or whatever. So that was sort of audience 2, and then audience 3 was folks who liked what we did with Fate Core and Fate Accelerated, and wanted to see how those tools might be applied in a Dresden context.
Gotcha.
And those three sort of pillars, roughly speaking, in order of majority target, was the idea behind the game. It really took off, I think. So the other part of it too was that we had, for folks who are not familiar with the original Dresden Files RPG, one of the things that people tend to talk about a lot when they talk about it is that it is written as an in-universe document.
Which is one of my favorite things about it. I was going to bring that up.
And so So that was another question, right? When we were starting to develop it, was, are we going to do that again? And we decided that if we didn't, a lot of people would be mad. So we decided to go ahead and do it. And so we came up with this conceit. The in-character conceit is that Dresden Files Accelerated is actually written by Ivy, the archive. And the archive has been tasked by because the archive, people frequently consult the archive for services, right?
Yes.
She's essentially speaking the Oracle at Delphi, except a little bit more reliable.
Yeah.
And so someone has contracted the archive to provide them a primer on the supernatural world and a way of sort of navigating it, because they are newer to that world and are interested in sort of figuring out like what the risks are of navigating that world. We do not say in the book who the benefactor is. That is left as an exercise for the reader to determine. But
Ivy, wow.
But Ivy's answer to that person's request is to provide a little bit of a primer and then say, if you really want to learn how to get into the heads of your potential adversaries or other people you might encounter in the world, here is imagination enacted crisis training for you and your, friends. And so the second half of the book is this role-playing game that Ivy develops as a way of getting that done. And that's the premise. And we thought,
I'm slightly in awe of that premise. I have to admit, that's fantastic.
Oh, thanks. I honestly thought that Jim was gonna nuke it from space.
That's the other thing I'm looking at. It's like, wait, you actually got this past him?
Yeah, well, and here's why. We were worried about the challenge of it, because Ivy can't be wrong.
Yeah.
So, so for your listeners who don't know, Ivy the Archive is basically a person who carries within them knowledge of everything that has been written down, whether it's written down in a book or on a post-it note or wherever, right? Mm-hmm. As soon as that happens, the archive instantly knows that information, right?
I always think of her as kind of a human Akashic Records.
Right. Yeah. So that is what. So that's that character, and the reason why people go to the archive for information. And that also means that she, technically speaking, can't be wrong. So we were worried that was going to require some really careful navigation, but we got lucky because Jim signed off on the concept, and we got a cracking good team on it. The lead writer on it is my friend Pamela Alexander, mm-hmm. And she basically was, story goddess of the book, and made sure. And she has managed all of those conversations with Jim to make sure that the things that Ivy was saying were consistent with, what was going on in the setting, even up to and including stuff that Harry did not know or that Harry was mistaken about. So there's some sections in the book where we give information that is different from what Harry or what some other character may have said in the novels to date, because it's all told from Harry's perspective, and Harry is not the most reliable of narrators.
Yeah,
so
he's not Ivy.
So that's another fun thing, right? Is that there's going to be some connect the dots moments where like folks might be flipping through the role playing game and like see a thing or two and be like, oh.
Especially knowing that it's like, because I can think of other workarounds to Ivy never being wrong, but given the getting the input from the creator,
well,
like you're saying, yeah,
and
that's going to be really interesting to read.
And there's certain moments where she does, and there's some of the workarounds that we did rely on still. I mean, there's some places where she deliberately withholds information.
Yeah.
And there's some places where she's essentially speaking wrong on purpose because of who she's talking to. And then that gets into, can you deduce who it is that she's talking to? And if you can, then that will make sense.
I'm not going to ask because I don't want to know, but do I take it that you have a specific person that she's talking to in mind?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we know who the contractor is, yeah.
I'm going to have to sit down and read this. Well, at this point, I'm kind of at that meme that you see with Fry from Futurama of, why I'm throwing money at the screen, why is this not working? So you had me at Ivy Rodents.
Yeah.
But you had me at Dresden Accelerator, but you really had me at Ivy Rodents.
Yeah. So it's a cool ride. It'll be I hope that it'll be super fun. But it's sort of also like, it's also interesting because like the game part of it too, because it's from Ivy's perspective,
yeah,
is almost like I said, it was actually Clark Valentine who we brought back again for this project, came up with that term, this imagination enacted crisis training. And I don't know if he came up with that specific phrasing for the term, but like he was the one that really turned me on to the idea that the way that Ivy would present it would be as like military crisis planning. And I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. So it's very much like the game part of it is very much about like, instead of being sort of city driven, it's more faction driven, right? It's like, who are the factions in the area? What do they want? How are they going to go about getting that? And then sort of the action of the game is you is moving that piece on the board, right? Like if they have these next steps that are like, the next thing we're going to do is try and take over the way into the Never Never that is at this place. That's where your next game scenario is, right? Like they go ahead and attempt that takeover, and then you play it out and see what happens, right? And then as you play the scenarios, you alter what the motivations are and what the resources are of these factions and where they're going next. And so you use the interactions between these broader groups to come up with the material for what you do with your specific PCs on the ground, right? And that's sort of how it rolls. So it's more, that's the shift, is that instead of like building the city and building all of the interesting stuff into the city, it's build the threats and send the threats against each other, sort of in their pretzel of relationships, and then see what rolls out, right? It's a lot. There's a lot of inspiration from, I don't know if you're familiar with Apocalypse World, but there's a lot of
I'm familiar with Monster of the Week, which I think is related.
Yes, same system. But the fronts in Apocalypse World are very was a big inspiration for figuring that dynamic out. Yeah, so but yeah, that's in a nutshell, that's the game.
Very nice. And I want to say as well for my listeners, I'm sure there are people out there that are not gamers. I'm sorry. Just as I'm sorry if you haven't been introduced to the Dresden Files yet. Um, but if you're a fan of the books, I'd still say it's worth picking up the games because the fact that you guys wrote it in universe is so much fun.
Right, there is that. Well, yeah, we wanted to make sure that it served decently as reference material. Although what's interesting about that is that you can even see within the 7 years sort of like a shift in the approach, because like now it being 2017,
Mm-hmm.
like looking up information about the Dresden Files, like it would be almost impossible to compile a reference document for the Dresden Files that is more complete than what the crowd is going to be able to do on a wiki.
True.
So what's even interesting about that is that in the game came out in 2010 and obviously was being like developed and written before that, and it is definitely a product of its time in the sense that like we felt this responsibility to sort of exhaustively cover these topics and provide this sort of reference material. Whereas with Accelerated, we overview the topics that Ivy would consider most important for the contractor.
Mm-hmm.
But we also sort of rely unofficially on the fact that, like, if you need to know what X particular kind of thing is, you can Google that up and, like, be on the Dresden Files wiki immediately, and it will tell you, right? Like,
yeah, it's not hard to find that info.
So that gave us sort of the freedom to say we can make an accelerated game with the Dresden Files because the requirement to be as comprehensive has diminished a great deal in the intervening years, right?
This is true, but that isn't actually what I necessarily meant. I just meant more the flavor of, particularly one of the things I love about the books is just the running side commentary between Billy, Harry, and Bob.
Yeah, the marginalia. Yeah. The much touted marginalia. It's funny. There's the marginalia people in Accelerated. Well, it's just one person is Kincaid.
Makes sense.
So it's Ivy and Kincaid jabbering at each other over this document, which is pretty funny. Pamela did a really good job at putting a lot of that stuff in there, and basically all of anybody who worked on the document, because now it's like I think we're up to like 7 or 8 people that have had their hands in it at this point in time, contributed stuff to that. So it's all, I think it's all pretty funny. But yeah, that's one of those things, man, where it's like if you do it once and it works, you can't not do it.
Yeah.
So like on the one hand, like when I read, when I look back through the book, like I'm glad that we did it because I think it definitely added something to the book. And when you get the Paranet papers, it's like Murphy is in it as a marginalia commenter.
Nice.
So it's like I believe it's Billy, Butters, and Murphy are the 3. And
Butters.
And that just represents sort of when in the timeline that book takes place.
Yeah, from saying that, even without knowing anything else, I could probably make an educated guess.
Right. So, on the one hand, it's like I love it and I hate it at the same time, because on the one hand, I look at it and I'm like, yeah, I definitely know what this adds to the books and so on and so forth. But now we cannot go into a Dresden Files RPG project without thinking about the marginalia. Like, who's going to write that? And like, I imagine, that's one of those other things, right? Where it's like the moment that we don't do it, there's a whole swath of people that would be like, that was the best part.
Welcome to the wonderful world of nerddom. Change
Sure,
anything,
yeah.
somebody's going to be unhappy.
Oh, sure.
That'd make a lot of people unhappy.
So, yeah. But yeah, it's Kincaid and Ivy, which is pretty funny. Because Kincaid, what's funny about Kincaid is that he has no, like, Kincaid's not a gamer, right? Like, he
really isn't.
he has no context. And we got some mileage out of that in Paranormal Papers, because Murphy's not a gamer either. But, like, we had sort of Billy and Butters as, like, the two, like, hardcore gamers, and then Murphy offering sort of outside, like, more practical commentary, right?
Yeah.
And here, it's really more like, I would describe it, I guess, as like, if Ivy and Kincaid were the only two people in a sitcom, what would that sound like? Is really more like, a lot of the stuff, the commentary in the marginalia doesn't even really, like, it's all like side comments and that with them sniping at each other over like weird stuff, and it's like there were parts, like, we used the marginalia in the other games more often and more directly to explain parts of how the game works without having to put like a gigantic sidebar on that page, you know?
Yeah.
And there's less of that in this book and more of the two of them, of Kincaid just putting his snarky notes all over the manuscript, and like Ivy responding to them, you know.
It just Kincaid being Kincaid.
Right. Yeah. So
I enjoy Kincaid, and I enjoy Ivy too, for that matter.
Right. Well, and it's also an interesting Ivy too, because it's Ivy as is caught up to the current novel. So she's, 17, I think. So it's a little bit different too from what she's been in the books.
Yeah, she's grown up through the series.
She's grown up through the series, so she's also now in her late teens, which means that her, as a character, she's kind of interesting because she, and, thank all the gods for Jim to, help us, like, give us the guidance on how to not mess this up.
Yeah.
But she has a very sophisticated sort of perspective on herself as well, right? Because now she's getting old enough to where she is starting to think about being the archive rather than just being the archive, right? Mm-hmm. And there's that self-examination sort of, there are moments where it comes through in like a very, what I think is a very poignant way, that it's clear that, like, not that she's having doubts, right? But sort of that she's coming into an understanding of what it means to sort of bear the burden of being that person, right?
Yeah.
And there's that whole argument that's in the Dresden Files. Now we're getting really deep in the weeds. At this point in time, your viewer, your listener who doesn't know the Dresden Files is like, and I'm gonna go have a sandwich. But
and I'm okay with that.
But
I got another interview in a couple hours for that guy.
All right, fair enough. But there's this question that runs through the Dresden Files of like, people get up in Harry's business because Harry, when he first meets the archive, tries to establish a human relationship with her, right? And like tries to sort of connect her to like normal little girl stuff.
Let her be a kid.
Let her be a kid, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I should say little kid stuff, because I don't, because some of the stuff that
Otters are cute.
Introduces her to, I don't know if like they're particularly gendered, but little kid stuff certainly.
Yeah.
And and there are people that get into a conversation with them about that are like, you are setting this person up for a life of extraordinary heartbreak when they come to terms with the fact that she cannot have the life that you're tempting her with, right?
Mm.
And Harry's, counter argument is sort of, if she doesn't retain some piece of her humanity, she's going to become essentially speaking, a walking biocomputer, and that sucks and is horrible, right?
I'd say it's even worse than that, just because she is a walking powerhouse.
Right, yeah, well, there's that too.
Having her operate without some human emotional component is scary.
Right. So what I find interesting in the book, and it's not like we don't hit you over the head with it, like there are like little glimpses of it in the book, where you don't know whether or not Harry's counter argument is correct. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Because like the things that Ivy is starting to realize about herself are partly because Harry has helped humanize her, and there are going to be consequences for that, right?
Yeah.
So because everything in Harry's life has to have consequences, because Jim's goal is basically to inflict as much pain on Harry as is humanly possible. So there are some of those things where you start to see her sort of grapple with that a little bit, I think, in sort of like the edges of the book. And you can sort of see the point of that argument of like, man, maybe it wasn't a good idea to set the archive on the road of thinking about this stuff, because like, man, if she even for a moment starts to question what she's become or what she's becoming, like, what are the consequences of that, Yeah. She is too important to the cosmos, right? To allow that to be. So it's it's an interesting thing.
No, her and Kincaid both are interesting characters. I mean, Kincaid in particular, with his backstory, and as I said, I'm very fond of Dracula. It's
right.
Like looking to see that play out, and all of the references in the RPG and in the various books to Dracul and Dracula, and the fact I like that Jim gets the fact they're two different people, right? When so many people confuse it.
Right. Right. Like, well, right. And that precise relationship, I don't actually think, I think that was one of the things that that Jim specifically told us not to reveal. So there's and that's the other, sort of that other challenge of like why we thought that the Ivy thing was going to be a problem is because whatever she reveals to her benefactor.
Yeah.
Although, I should say her clients.
Bringing that up just makes the one thing I had already pretty much, I think most people already figured out, even more apparent, which is that clearly Dracul is going to be a player as the series progresses.
I have no idea. I just remember that was an area where we were told to tread carefully, and I don't know if that necessarily means that, like, when Jim gives us those instructions, mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily always mean that that detail is going to become a big part of the books, but it might become part of a dialogue scene between two characters. Yeah. That, like, if Kincaid wants to have a moment, it ends up having a moment with a character where he reveals something about his backstory as a way of bonding with that character.
You don't want to spoil that. I get that.
You don't want to spoil that moment, right, for the reader. So it just depends, right? It can be on the Gigantor level, or it can be on like the very, very tiny character interaction level. But
fair enough. Although it's still, my deduction is that Dracul and probably Dracula himself are both going to wind up being players before the series is over.
Well,
That seems to me at least to be the implication of where things are going.
I have no idea. And I'm not
I
even
wouldn't want
saying
you to
that.
tell me if you did, to be honest. I'd like to be
Right, yeah, I'm not
surprised.
even saying that in like a sly, cannot confirm or
You don't
deny
know.
kind of way. Like, I literally don't know.
It's not
So,
Jim's famous, I'm not going to tell you.
right. I mean, there was some stuff that we knew. There is some stuff that I know that everyone else doesn't know. And for a long time, of course, you know, the initial one, of course, like way early on back in the day, right, was that we knew what was going to happen, at least roughly speaking, in changes. Like, we had to sit on that for a long time.
Oh, I can imagine. It's such a huge game change. I mean, it changes.
Changes the book, right? In fact, I think that was even like layered because Fred knew. And like, there was a conversation when I started getting involved with the IP. There was a conversation early on where Fred was like, well, you're going to have to decide how deep you want to get into like the rabbit hole of secret knowledge, because like you're still doing you know, you're still a fan too, right?
Yeah.
So the agreement that I made with him originally was, I need to know all of the information that I need to do my job as a developer of this RPG. And at the time, that did not include what it was that happened in Changes, because of course, like, Harry didn't know that was coming. And so when we determined that the in-character voice for the books was going to be Billy and the Alphas working off of Harry's case files, suddenly there was a lot of information that I didn't need to know, right?
Yeah.
And then once the game came out, and then Paranet Papers, we started developing Paranet Papers, and then started going into this other game and stuff. Like, the window of secret knowledge began to open in a much wider capacity. So there are some things that I know, but I don't know that.
The joking question would be, do you know the answer to the ultimate question, which is, when is the next book coming? And I'm joking.
No, I don't know that either.
I'm sorry to wonder if anyone knows, with all respect to Jim.
Well, you know, he operated at a very, very intense, and still does operate at a very intense schedule. So
I realize, and he has the new series he just started, and he's got his own projects, and I totally respect that. It's just the fanboy in me going, I don't want to wait.
Sure. Well, hopefully you won't have to for too much longer. And in the meantime, of course, there's a new role-playing game to tide you over.
Yes, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
So, we're getting down to our last half hour.
Sure.
We could probably wrap this up soonish. I got some things I got to take care of. I'm getting over being sick, unfortunately.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
Before we get going, is there anything in particular? I mean, you got the Paranet Papers coming out soon, and
the Paranet Papers are out.
Not Paranet. Yeah, I'm sorry. Accelerated coming out soon.
Yeah.
Paranet Papers are out. People that are interested, I will put links in the description to Evil Hat's website and Drive Through RPG, where you guys can get all this stuff.
Cool.
Is there anything else you have coming up? Any conventions, appearances, anything like that you'd like to mention?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what my convention schedule is going to be like. I've moved into a place career-wise where I'm sort of behind the curtain a lot more now, because I'm like with Evil Hat. Most of what I do is help other people who are designing Fate stuff sort of get their project to where it needs to be. And as the creative director at John Wick Presents, a lot of it is sort of management behind the scenes, making sure that like everything that's on our production schedule continues to sail forward smoothly, and that kind of stuff. So I'm no longer sort of in the writer designer capacity that would put me at conventions.
Do either of those companies have books coming out shortly you want to mention? Anything you feel like mentioning?
The Seventh Sea second edition Kickstarter is continuing to produce magic. Seventh Sea is basically a Renaissance fantasy swashbuckling game, and it is the first book. Heroes and Villains is starting to ship, and we have a number of books that are coming down the pipe imminently, and will probably be going to print here in at least the next couple weeks, and if not within the month. So that Kickstarter was huge. It was like a $1.5 million Kickstarter, and
congratulations.
funded like 10 supplements. So we have put out one of those. We are very nearly to print with 2 more of those, and we are and everything else is sort of in the process of like writing and editing and production. So that I would check out the 7th Sea second edition Kickstarter. We update it all the time, so you can see what's going on there. On the Evil Hat side, that I think Dresden Files Accelerated is like the next major thing that's going out. There's also a card game, the Dresden Files cooperative card game, which is going out at around the same time, which is just sweet. I didn't have anything to do with it, so I'm a huge fan of it. And it's basically you take on the characters in the books, and it's a co-op sort of deck building and with some elements of like placement type of game, where you collectively as the cast of a book try and beat the book.
This sounds like fun.
Oh, it's really cool.
You're gonna bankrupt me. You're giving me all these things to go spend money on.
Well, it's either we are.
Granted, I was gonna spend money on a lot of them already, but
we are unfortunately locked in a battle for mutual survival. I have to bankrupt you, or I don't eat. So.
And I want you to be able to eat.
But yeah. So all that stuff is out there, and that's
And listeners, I'll put links in the description so you can find all this stuff, because I'm sure you guys will be interested in checking it out too.
And other than that, I don't really know what else I could talk about. We've got about 20 minutes left.
It's always an interesting one to ask, so I'll ask you this: do you have anything you'd be curious to ask me?
I am curious. Tell me a story about what was the last investigation you did that was really significant to you, and tell me why.
That's a good question. The last really personal and significant investigation I did is actually a very famous place. It's called Eastern State Penitentiary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are a number of the like I think Ghost Hunters went there once, and yeah.
Well, yeah, Ghost Hunters has been there. A bunch of those other TV shows have been there. Way back, and I want to say the 90s. The very first season of a show called The Scariest Places on Earth went there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it went there with my mentor, a guy by the name of Lou Gentili. Now, Lou passed away in 2009. and Eastern State had been in big investigation for him, both when he was coming up as an investigator and because it was one of his very first times on television. And when he died, about a month later, myself, the exorcist that we worked with, and a couple other guys who knew him, all got to go running around in there for about 5 hours in the dead of night.
Cool.
And it was such a fun way to remember him.
Right.
And just, sit around, tell some stories. We had dinner first, and we all shared stories of Lou and his various crazy shenanigans over the years. And I'll tell you, sitting up in cell block 12, because he actually got attacked live on the air by a demonic force in that cell block. And we're sitting there and we're doing EVP.
Yeah.
And we're seeing these black shadowy forms just running up and down the hallways. And lights zipping in and out of the various cells. It was a really neat experience. Especially because this is all happening right at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
But especially...
See, that's...
Yeah.
That's why I don't get into that business, because it's always like paranormal investigation. I'm like, the downside of paranormal investigation is the possibility that you might actually find something. And I've seen enough horror movies to know that, like, that's not me.
Yeah. I'll
be in the van.
Yeah.
I'll be in the van.
Well, you have to remember that there's also the advantage of, in this particular instance, I had a fully ordained exorcist on hand.
Well, there you go.
It's like, if it really hits the fan, he can handle it.
Fair enough.
But I want to thank you for coming on. You've been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, this is cool.
Okay, folks, I'm going to be logging out a little early. I need to rest, get some liquids in me, just because, like I said, I'm getting over being sick. I will be back at 8 o'clock to interview Stephen LaChance about the confrontation with evil, about the case, the book he just wrote about the case that inspired the movie The Exorcist. This has been me and Leonard Balsera. Am I getting your name right, or am I butchering
it?
Yeah,
Leonard, Balsera, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. The author of Dresden Files Accelerated. He's written for the Dresden Files RPG, Fate, a lot of other awesome things. Remember, look in the links below to find links to where you can find all his cool stuff. And Leonard, have a great night. Again, it's been a pleasure. And listeners, I will see you again in a little over 2 hours.
All right, thanks for having me.
Thank you.